Good morning, everybody. Our first animation here just looks at some rainfall here over the last 10 hours or so. And one of the things we got to be talking about this week is that the pattern that we've been discussing now for over 2 weeks is finally done. So what did it start with? It started with the bunching up of the jet stream in the North Pacific. That was the high over low block that turned into an omega pattern. And then it finished with a big southeastern ridge. But that southeastern ridge is being eroded away very, very quickly today. And as it does so, we're going to see a lot of cold air coming into this area. Unfortunately, the rainfall that's in this region is not expected to kind of penetrate into the southeast, which when you think about this area and the southwestern United States, these have been the two driest spots with the way that this pattern is set up. Now, I wanted to show you some satellite data from yesterday. So this was Sunday, and as I just kind of play forward, you can see, again, the presence of that large southeast ridge. But I wanted you to notice how much snow we could now see through the cloud field up here in parts of, well, southern Canada, getting into Montana and the northern plains. And it was pretty impressive to see that snowpack. I'll show you the snowfall amounts in a few moments, but before I go any further, you do need to see how this low, very thick cloud cover here advanced through parts of New Mexico, down into southern Texas, and eventually down here into parts of Louisiana. And we're going to have some dense fog advisories because of that going into this morning. One other thing to point out, we do have to talk about the tropics in this video. It's not going to be this tropical disturbance right here that we're going to have to discuss. I still think the southeast ridge has enough punch, to keep that one out. But the Caribbean has been doing some interesting things in the weekend weather forecasts, and I'll bring that back up in a few moments. All right, so let's look at a snowfall total map. Now, this goes through midday Sunday, and what it shows you is season to date. So we start the season on September 30th. Really, it's October 1st. That would be the beginning of the water year for the United States. And so this is what I've got for snowfall totals. Now, of course, we watched the third and final system come out of Colorado, delivering some very heavy snow into this area. And it did produce some patchy snow that came into parts of Nebraska and Iowa and even a little bit into Wisconsin. So remember, when you look at a map like this, that doesn't really fully capture some of those events. This is kind of a map where my color scale exaggerates pretty quickly. But you can see here in Yellowstone, for example, are coming through a big section of Montana into North Dakota. And this, of course, extended into the southern Canadian prairie. It just shows you where that one time period of getting the jet stream all bunched up, more meridional flow than zonal flow in the North Pacific, what it resulted in. Now, please keep that in the back of your mind as I start to explain to you where this pattern is going to go in a few moments. But I want to show you the rainfall side of this first. So this was through 12 a.m. this morning, and it's looking at 7 days worth of precipitation. And if you remember back over the last 10 to 12 days, we continued to hone in on an area in through here that had a pretty high probability of grabbing at least 4 inches of rainfall. Now, we know that the model's prediction of that and what actually happens, there's always going to be some disparities. We're using the model for guidance here. But what it shows is that we had parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas getting up to like the Boot Hill of Missouri, even into parts of Kentucky where it's still raining this morning here. There's a lot of area right in through here that picked up better than 6 inches of rain. Our second heavy spot was right into this part of Kansas and Missouri, and the third was up here. Remember, last week we saw a lot of severe storms, a lot of low-top supercells producing hail in this particular region. But snow on the northern side, remember this all began in the Pacific Northwest, and it began with Norma getting pulled into into Texas and Oklahoma. And this map just really illustrates the size and strength of that southeastern ridge. 7 days of nothing down here in the southeast. We're going to ask if that's going to fill in with this upcoming pattern starting to shift itself back around again. So I can't tell you, though, I have the best of news for stopping this kind of fall drought development over parts of the southeast, though. So as all this water came in, of course, we saw what it did to the soil moisture last week. I'll continue to show you those updates throughout this week, but I want to get right to the point, which is just our continual monitoring of the Mississippi River. So it has come up, all right? We're now at negative 8.87 feet below low stage, and there is more of that water that needs to kind of trickle into the tributaries, the river system to continue to bring this up. But a lot more is needed. Remember, there's overall a thought that in the next month, 30 days from now, by the end of November, we're going to see these values. Maybe they don't climb up perfectly straight like that, but we do expect it to be above low stage by the time we finish this month of November. So let's kind of get in here and get some of the stats out of this. This is what month-to-date precipitation ranks have looked like so far. So again, a lot of this just getting added here, in these areas, and then of course down here in the south. But that southeastern ridge, look at its effect here. Now, we've already watched massive drought develop in Louisiana and Mississippi. The southeastern ridge kept this whole area dry for the last 10 days, and we've watched the drought monitor expand in this area. Because California, Arizona, and New Mexico are still waiting on the development of some sense of some stronger subtropical jet stream flow, they are drier as well. Our jet stream, when it did get active, entered the United States from the north and west and ejected through the mountains. So we need to see a changeover in the Pacific jet stream behavior in order to really change the drought situation here and, in the near term, change it here in the southeast. And that's why when we look at our drought monitor, we saw expansion in the southwest and then extending here from Louisiana, Mississippi, almost over toward the Appalachian Mountains. Now, overall, as we look at this drought picture, again, I want to illustrate what I think is going to change by the time we're talking about this in March. We're currently sitting at somewhere, just a shade under 60% in, drought-covered area. And that goes everywhere from abnormally dry to D4 or exceptional drought, like you have down here in Louisiana, Mississippi, in pockets of Texas, although this will likely change in a big way with the new map that's going to come out this Thursday. But what I think will change most this winter is going to be this whole area and through here. And I think we're going to see reduction here. And I do not expect, based off what I know today, that the Northwest is going to see their drought expand. Okay, I think this is the type of fall and winter pattern that's going to be a drought reducer across the country. So please just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, today, though, I got to start back off where I left off on Friday, which is with the temperatures. We mentioned this map was going to get very colorful, right? And here we are at 5:50 this morning on Monday, and we have an expansive area of freeze warnings. That's what this shade is. There's freeze watches out ahead of this, and there's that dense fog I mentioned, kind of finally moving down, much farther toward the coast here. All the way over into California, though, we do have, some of the risk here of some stronger winds still in Southern California. And we're going to just continue to pay attention to, there's a risk for some blowing snow up here in parts of North Dakota. And with the clipper that's going to roll through this area here very soon, it's going to be producing some pretty strong winds. So there's still a little bit more snow coming through this little corridor here with that system I told you about last week that was born out of the Arctic and is now at the beginning of this week for Halloween making its way all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Actually, it's going to curl a little bit, I guess, toward the east before it gets there. But the cold air from it's going to go down pretty far to the south. So here you go. This is what the next 7 days looks like in terms of frost extent. It's extensive, right? I mean, we see it getting all the way down, almost to I-10, and maybe a little bit farther south of that in certain places. So I figured we just pick up where we left off and talk more about those temperatures. So here's this morning's lows. All right, still see the influence of that southeastern ridge, but as we go from Monday into Tuesday, there's Halloween. That's our frost line. That's the 32-degree line, I should say, in the NDFD. Will be 0 degrees up here in parts of north central North Dakota, and then as we go into Wednesday, we've got, again, pretty far to the south extent. I think the farthest it gets is on Thursday. There you go. Now, after that, we talked last week, and things have held together pretty well, that there's going to be some mild Pacific air kind of flooding into the country. So by Friday into Saturday and Sunday, we kind of turn this whole ship around. But the high temperatures are going to follow suit. So remember, last week, when we began our discussion, actually before that too, we were in the 90s here. And now we see on Monday high temperatures, in Austin, like 43. Very cold weather coming through. So this is Tuesday, Halloween. Pretty chilly day across a big section of the country getting into Wednesday and Thursday of this week. And here comes more of that mild air. We're expecting some downslope flow here. So we're, again, like we talked about on Friday, coming over the mountains. As it descends, it compressionally warms. That spreads quite a bit of warmth all the way out here about the 100th meridian. And we go from Thursday into Friday and Saturday, more mild air spreading across the country. We do see some contamination, not contamination, but this is what happens when there's snow. The models just tend to keep the area cooler because of the snowpack. It's insulating, and we're seeing that here. But by Saturday, getting ourselves into Sunday, much of the country is back over on kind of a bit of a mild kick. Now, how long does that last, and what changes in the future? Well, let's go right to the 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies, and we're going to start with your next 5 days, and just play this quickly out today, 5 through 10. Now, whenever I see a pattern adjust like that, and again, we talked about it last week, but just to reiterate, this is a pattern that is kind of losing amplitude. Maybe it's gaining momentum west to east, but it's losing the amplitude of an aggressive trough ridge pattern. So what I'm telling you is unless you're right here along the west coast, really in the northwest, we're going into week off, right? So for 6 weeks now, we've been saying week on, week off, week on, week off. And maybe it's been 10 days on, 10, it doesn't matter. The pattern just keeps doing this. But you notice out here, that's day 10 now, right? This is day 10 through 15. We're getting a sense of more East Coast troughing. Now, what sparked the big system we just dealt with, the three of them, was a bunched up jet stream in the Pacific and a southeastern ridge. That is not this pattern. Let me get that off there. This pattern's doing something a bit more like this again. And if you're going, wait a minute, I've seen that. You have. That was what the pattern looked like for most of October until last week. I'm going to address that again in a few moments, but tuck it away in the back of your head for just a second. Now, I keep mentioning this extended jet, and we've kind of been looking a lot at these diagrams, helping us to understand that. We notice that right now the jet is extended. So in other words, it's not close to Japan. It's pushed itself across the Pacific, and it's still a bit farther south. And we want to know, is this something we're going to see a lot of throughout winter? Extended jets that at times head south. And El Nino would tell you to look out for that. And so we need to still ask, is El Nino at some point going to take over as a dominant teleconnection? Because this is what it's doing to the jet right now. So here early Monday morning, that's our southeast ridge. So can you see the flow's coming up and over the top and running? And what's it running over? A big ridge in this area. So playing through Monday into Tuesday, the ridge is squashed by the cold air that's in this trough, which again began life here in Siberia, came this area of the Arctic, came through the Canadian archipelago, down this weekend through parts of Manitoba. It is right now about to live over Minnesota, Wisconsin, spreading some snow, and it will dive all the way by Wednesday down to the Gulf Coast. That's how that cold air is going to go. Now watch. After this is the piece I'm keeping my eye on. You see playing through November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. What we're seeing is a piece of the jet really beginning to extend its way between Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands, right smack dab in the middle of the Pacific, right into the West Coast. And that kind of flow, when it comes in like that, can deliver a lot of moisture. Most of that moisture lives here. The mountains are going to suck a lot of this out. This is all the way by next Monday. What do we have to watch for next week is some very weak, what we call lee cyclogenesis. Maybe a low is born somewhere here on the lee side of the Rockies and goes across the country in this kind of pattern. What I did note is that over the weekend, the models were pretty consistent by the 8th and the 9th, that this pattern is producing very strong winds across the country, but it's also beginning to break apart out here in the Pacific again. Now, that breaking apart initially takes us back to where we started the month of October, which was something like ridging here, troughing there, and that we saw a lot of that pattern in the month, early in the month of October. But could we see ourselves going into a reset here, such that by the middle of November, we're talking about another big system coming out of the Rocky Mountains? I think we are. Now, when does this start to really take off for the East Coast? Because I know I got a lot of folks that watch this stuff on the East Coast. You're like, man, if you could just give me a jet stream like that in the middle of winter, we would be buried in snow. And that's true, as long as you can keep some high pressure over Ontario and Quebec, really over Quebec. But we're going to see what this could potentially do once we get out there into the middle of the month in terms of delivering some moisture to the east. But I still think that the month of November features 3 sizable systems that come across the United States born on the Rocky Mountains. The west begins the month with flow coming right out of the west. We're going to see a transition middle of the month to a lot more activity here. I kind of see this particular pattern loading itself up. That's a big just loading itself up, though, for 10 days from now, okay? Next, at the very end of every model run I watched this weekend, the ensembles, we started to see the subtropical jet showing back up. Now, that is an El Nino feature that we would expect to see come December, January, February. And I want to know if it's got some flavors in the month of November, because I've been waiting for a while for El Nino to surface as the dominant teleconnection. And I got a little bit of information about that for you at the end of this morning's briefing. Okay, so now that you know what I'm watching in terms of the jet stream, let's get in here and let's see what this means. For the next 15 days, everywhere that you see these shades of brown is where we're not expecting above average precipitation. There are systems that are going to roll through, but they're weak. They're not as big as the ones we just saw. They're not delivering the rainfall. So what do we end up getting? The area where the nose of the jet enters the west, that's where it's going to be wet. That's our wettest spot in the country. Now, that doesn't mean no precipitation for everybody else. It just means that's going to be the main target area. All right, the individual details of this. Let's start off with the high-res NAM. So our main front kind of pushes but falls apart on the Appalachian Mountains, falls apart in New England, and really doesn't extend into the southeast. This light snow coming in later today, this is again why we had those advisories out for North Dakota. This light snow that's going to come in through here today has the chance for a 1 to 3 incher right in through the area that you're going to see the blue show up. This is the little wave that began life about 10 days ago in the Arctic. And man, the model's got it. The European model had this down 7 days in advance. And there it is. I'm just kind of rocking back and forth over tonight into tomorrow. So this is through 9 a.m. So coming through southern Wisconsin, you can see just kind of pinwheeling around it. There are stronger winds. There's going to be some snowflakes flying in the air right here throughout parts of the Midwest. And it curls itself into lower Michigan and right here into Indiana and Ohio. We even get a little bit of lake effect out of this one as well. But this is the large high-pressure cell that is riding on the backside of that front that's just delivering all the cold air into the south. And so that's through Wednesday morning. We'll play out through the middle of the day on Wednesday, and things clear out and they get ready to reset. Now, the reset happens west first. A lot of quiet weather in the middle section of the country after that little clipper sneaks on through. To see that, let's go look at the total accumulated precip first. Now, this is just liquid equivalent. What are the models adding? Well, this has already happened, right? And that's a little clipper coming through. And what is the next chance for moisture? Well, I mean, I just played you all the way through Friday. And what do we see? It's just the Pacific Northwest that takes on the next system, Thursday into Friday. And what we'll keep an eye on this weekend is maybe just something trying to sneak out and run right along this edge, the northern side of where the jet stream will be. But I just played you out. I'll stop it at 7 days just to be like we normally do. And you see a lot of white on the map, indicating that we've got a lot of areas that are not expecting much precipitation, and the GFS is on board with the same thing. I mean, we can just compare our models and see very similar forecasts. So what does it look like? Well, if we look at the two models together, GFS left, European right, we've already watched the little clipper come through. So there it is in the GFS, there it is in the European. European's a bit further to the west, right on the Mississippi River, whereas the GFS just plows in this big area of high pressure, keeping it more over Wisconsin. And then we see that sneak through into New England. The system that could have been running up the East Coast is now off the coast. And that's, I know a lot of folks in the Northeast disappointed, wanted to see a decent system come through. But this is Wednesday, ready? After that, you're just going to watch the Northwest. By Thursday, the first wave comes in. We could see, now just watch right here, this week, something sneak out of that. But there's just no strong dynamics with this, no curves, no upper level divergence to lead to a big surface low. And you got to get curves or speed change in the flow to make that happen. So maybe Friday we'll keep an eye on something coming across here, but the Pacific Northwest, it's what's taking on the next system. So this is by Saturday into Sunday and maybe next week. Can you kind of see how both models wanted to toss this guy out right there along that northern side? Could have another late weekend, early next week system that goes across here. So when does it start to pick back up? Well, once we get out there to like Tuesday the 7th, this is when the pattern gets a little more flow to it, and I think we're going to go back into our week on. But overall, you look at that whole stretch of days, and there's not a whole lot happening there. Now, I say all of that, and in the same breath, I'm just going to tell you, there is something happening in the Caribbean. And we watched it all weekend, trying to decipher if the models are serious about developing something there. And so I'm going to give it to you two different ways. One of my favorite websites is this one, Tropical Tidbits. Just go to it, tropicaltidbits.com. Come across the top, click Forecast Models. It'll take you straight to the GFS model. Now, what I've got this parked on is about the same spot as I just left you off on the previous map, about November the 8th. And if you look right now on his maps, this is from Levi Cowan, brilliant scientist. You see this down here? Well, I want to show you something we've been watching, and I want to show you how to use his site. You have the option on his site, because he's a much better front-end developer than I am, to come down here and click on Trend GIF. And what I want to tell you we watched was for this, about this time period, next Wednesday, we've seen the models flirt with developing something out of this area. And I'm going to leave it on the US view because I want you to see what's also happened up the East Coast. So we're going to click Trend GIF. I've already changed the number to 10. Go ahead and leave the frames per second at 2. That's a good speed. And click Create GIF. Now it'll also offer you the chance to download it. I'm just going to not download it, but I want to show you The same time period, 18Z Wednesday, November the 8th, that's around noon. And what you're seeing here is that multiple model runs have attempted to do something down here, producing a system of significance. Now, would you like to see what the 6Z run wanted to do with it? It wanted to develop it into some huge system, a big arc-latex low that then just rips itself into New England. And there's a lot of folks saying there's some supporting evidence that this could be happening. But whatever it is has got a little bit of a birth out of the tropics, and we've got to get some deeper flow here. I'm talking trough coming in like this in order to make something like this occur. Now, I want to make a very important statement here. This is not yet fully into the European model. It's the GFS doing its GFS things out there day 8 through 12. But I need you to see that right now, the European model is picking up over the next 10 days on the potential for tropical depression development in this area. So I'm going to tell you that this week, this will be something we'll be talking about until it's not needed to be talked about again. And so I just want you to understand that there are a few things brewing that after the next 7 days just gets a bit more exciting. And we'll watch it to see how it evolves, but right now can't pin it down. What do we know is this. Our ensemble probability maps for snowfall suggest that right in through here there's a decent chance of getting an inch. Okay, that's the system that's coming through. In fact, if you look at the chance of getting 3 inches, there is some of that coming in with that clipper. We'll have some lake effect. We'll have some snow pretty deep into New England and parts of Quebec here, but also in Ontario. And our mountain's going to pick up some snow over the next 10 days, but pretty high elevation because that air coming in from the Pacific is mild. Let's go up to 6 inches, and you can see this is not the type of pattern to make a lot of snow. I want to flip this over now to show you the total precipitation probabilities, and I want to first examine who's going to be dry. So in a 10-day stretch, this is the chance of getting less than 1/2 of an inch. So when I tell you week off, I mean, yeah, we've got the system coming through here, and we've got all that wet weather nosing into the northwest. But there's a broad section of the Canadian prairie, much of the U.S., and even the southeast that goes over drier. So I can show you who's going to be wet. I think you can look at the inverse and see it pretty easily. It's here primarily. That's going to be a focal point. All right, this is where the pattern ends up though by the 10th, and that's why we have to watch. Could this trough, originate here and run? Yeah, it could, and that's why I want to say just watch these two areas to get something maybe working together here to come up the East Coast. But I also look at this pattern and say, if it really just evolves in this way where the coldest air is anchored everywhere kind of under this line, you've all seen this before. The west is active. There's a big ridge that runs over the Rockies. There's convergent flow in the jet stream here, and all of this is drier and colder. We've been there before. In fact, this is what most of October's look like. Some sort of trough here, another trough here, so the flow comes around and over and down. The difference is this is gone. The ridging that was over earlier in the month of October, which helped promote all of this colder, earlier, drier weather down here in the southeast. This is the piece that's gone now. So it's a different look, although how we get there might be similar. So what am I trying to say? Well, the week 2 precipitation forecasts now look like this. CPC, European model, GFS. Now remember, the GFS is pretty high on getting something to come out and run up into the East Coast. You can see the CPC isn't exactly ruling this out, but it would be at the very end of this week 2 time period we're talking about. So the understanding of it's pretty low. You notice that the Europeans got something and something, but it's drier in this area, continues to be wet in the west where the jet stream flow is coming in. Okay. With that as kind of a near-term discussion, let's talk a little longer range here. Now, once we start this new month, we get all new long-range data to kind of give us some guidance compared to what we also do, which is just to study the meteorology of the pattern. But the CPC on Friday did update their mid-November outlook. This is the 11th through the 24th. And I had mentioned, I thought they were just too mild, too long here along the west, and they must have been seeing the same thing I was seeing, because they not only went a bit cooler, just back to normal, but they increased the rainfall chances. They're also likely seeing the development of that subtropical jet coming in here. And I like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. And if it does develop, I think this shouldn't be dry either. So I agree with the adjustments that I saw in the CPC over the weekend. European model and its trend, this is that same time period I showed you last week. November 7th to December 7th. The West, almost no change from our discussion last week. Okay, go back and watch it if you need a bit more on that. This area, well, it didn't stay as wet, but it is not dry. And that is what I think is going to continue to be the case. I think that November favors three systems that come off of the Rocky Mountains and roll like they typically do. Maybe it's a Colorado low, maybe it's something a little bit farther to the south, maybe it comes out of Montana. I don't know. But we're going to see three halfway decently sized winter-type storm systems that roll across the country. We've got so much momentum building in the Pacific Jet. I don't know how it doesn't happen. But we'll watch for it, okay? What I want to share with you, though, is what I think has been controlling this pattern. And I'm going to give you kind of a deadline on it. Not a deadline, but maybe a point that I think it's going to end its influence. Now, we've talked for weeks about the strength of the Indian Ocean dipole. And I showed you that the last time it got this high on its value was in 2019. Now, listen, I've been doing this in all my weekend forecasts. 2019 is not an analog for the United States weather. But what's similar is just what the Indian Ocean dipole did. We've also got El Nino, warm North Atlantic. We've got the negative PMN. We got all these other things that are different from 2019. But what we do have that's similar is that the the IOD peaked, and it's starting to crash pretty quickly. And for another 45 days, we're going to see the influence of this. And what is similar to 2019 is what it is doing to the MJO. And as we saw last week, and this has just been a continuation of it, there's a large area of subsidence here with rising motion on either side. Now, how many times have we talked about that? You see, the reason I keep calling for November to have more activity is, and it'll still be that kind of week on, then exciting week, then week off, then exciting week, is because this particular pattern historically favors tossing troughs into the west. And it does not favor big Arctic blocking pattern. Phase 1 doesn't, phase 8 doesn't, and that's where the MJO is living right now. So I see a highly amplified pattern. I don't see a blocked pattern, and therefore I think it's going to move. But it's not going to move where there's going to be a massive system every week to talk about. It'll be week on, week off. So I'll leave that as my long range, just reiterating some of the stuff we covered last week, and understand that we're going to get some new information throughout the next week here or so. All right. From there, I want to bring up some international weather to talk about because we're finally seeing better rains getting into this part of Central America. This is going to be critical for the Panama Canal. Remember, October and November are their two wettest months. If we do not see that moisture coming up in that area, there's going to be issues. We also see Europe is expected to continue to stay very, very unsettled, all the way over to Russia as well. We see that there's some chance for rain in this part of Australia, but overall, Australia is a bit drier. Why? Well, the MJO is forcing subsidence here, rising motion there and there. See, that's where it's going to rain. It's not going to rain here. Keep an eye on Indonesia and the dryness because of this. And then finally, we need to talk about what's going on in South America. Because after weeks of seeing very fast planting progress, all of that heat stress we discussed last week and the lack of good rainfall in Brazil's north central growing areas has finally taken Mato Grosso off of a decent pace and now actually brought it 1.5 or 1.6% below the 5-year average. And we need to ask, are we going to stay down here? And do we end up bouncing out like this? Because that's a pretty sizable gap to be discussing. We knew preseason there was going to be problems, right? We said, hey, all of the models are suggesting some drier conditions, but then I changed my tune for about 6 weeks when we saw better rains coming into the air. We saw these fast planting numbers, but that heat in the most recent numbers brought this off. And now we're sitting here, which means there could be some issues. And we go look at the newest 10-day forecast. We continue to see flooding in southern Brazil. That has been, I've said that now for 6 straight weeks. Some sort of flooding in Sao Paulo, getting over to Parna, Santa Catarina, northern Rio Grande do Sul, Paraguay. We've seen the models kind of go back and forth on the rainfall throughout Mato Grosso. Just no exceptional heat. Brought the rain up here a bit. The Amazon's still very dry, still sucking the moisture out of the flow like we talked about last week. So I don't expect this to be something where a grower sitting in this area looking at a drier forecast going, yeah, I want to plan into that. I think there's going to be more patience shown here, and we'll just have to watch that carefully. Argentina saw some big storms late last week that hit like Santa Fe, which is right in through here. You can see the models attempting to go after more thunderstorm activity in Cordoba over toward Buenos Aires. but there are still long-standing dry conditions in this area, and many of those storms, just like they do in the Midwest of the United States in spring, miss a lot of folks. So this will be critical to watch as well. All right, bigger picture. I mentioned a while ago the Indian Ocean dipole holding the MJO hostage. If this begins to fade, which is what's been driving our strong trade winds, if that begins to fade, do we finally get El Nino taking over? I mentioned it in a couple of ways. The development of some sort of subtropical jet mid-November. We talked about what this particular setup could be doing to influence the frequency of the systems across the United States going forward. I think there's a case to be made that this El Nino at some point becomes the dominant teleconnection in the month of November. My evidence for that, if I could find the tab for us real quick, oh good, I found it, is this. This is the trade wind behavior that's expected to pick up by the middle of the month. And this is called a westerly wind burst. They are very, very common when there is an El Nino. And what I'm going to be watching for is I'm going to go to the Southern Oscillation Index, SOI, and what I'll be watching for is that we watch the SOI come up and up and up, almost touching -7, which is the threshold for El Nino. I think this is going to tank quickly when those trade winds crank back up. And if it tanks, that's your signal to suggest the pattern is finally going toward El Nino. Now, the Bureau of Meteorology is still, it's the most recent to update their El Nino forecast. That's what I'm going to show it to you. They're still suggesting this thing's going to be really, really strong. 2.8 C above average. But they're the only ones. Well, those guys in the French. So the Bureau of Meteorology and Meteo France are still aggressively trying to develop, let me take you to December. There you go. We're still trying to aggressively develop a very strong El Nino, possibly approaching 2.6 to 2.8 degrees C above average. To be honest, I think the UK Met Office and NOAA probably have it right, keeping this sub 2.0. And if that's the case, we will likely see sub-seasonal factors this winter outdo the long-term seasonal factors like ENSO or El Nino. And that's why these forecasts change so much as we go forward. So with that, I'm going to tell you what I'll be watching this week. You now know where the pattern's heading, what we'll be discussing for the next 10 days, and where I think this is going to go longer range. As the new data trickle in, we'll start to analyze it and give you the newest up forecast, all right? Have a good one, and I'll talk to you on Tuesday morning. Thanks.